So what's it like to go on a trip abroad with my husband's money?
My sister-in-law, Betty, arrogantly declared.
I wonder how it feels to live not just off your parents, but also off your brother.
I retorted, feeling a surge of anger at her audacity. Well, you're one to talk. You're a stay-at-home wife, and yet you hire a maid and don't do any housework at all.
That's enough. Both of you, stop it.
My father stepped in between Betty and me as our argument threatened to escalate. With a calm look on his face, he pacified me and looked up at Betty.
Seems like you can't enjoy your trip with us both here. We'll head back home. Sorry for disturbing.
My name is Lisa. I'm nearing my 40s and work while living with my father. My mother passed away due to illness 10 years ago, and my younger brother Jake, who is 5 years younger, has already married and left home. I live modestly with my father in our spacious house. It's not that I can't afford to live alone. I choose to live with my father because I'm worried about him. After losing my mother, he started having frequent health issues and was forced to quit his job as he neared retirement. His condition worsened to the point where he wouldn't eat for days unless reminded, and would be bedridden for almost 2 weeks if he fell ill. I couldn't leave my father alone in such a state. At that time, my brother Jake was already working as a lawyer and had a fiancé. Jake and his wife were planning to build a new home near our house, so it was inevitable that I would stay with my father. Jake is exceptionally gifted compared to me. I never thought that the woman he chose as his wife would turn out to be so unreasonable. Jake's wife, Betty, quit her job immediately after their marriage and became a housewife. She leaves all household chores to a hired butler, and her daily routine seems to revolve around luxury lunches and shopping at high-end stores. Jake is busy with work. Perhaps he doesn't have much time to spend with Betty, but her extravagant lifestyle is shocking. Living close to Jake and Betty's house, I couldn't help but hear about Betty's carefree life. What made it more intolerable were her remarks when she visited our house.
When are you planning to leave this house, Lisa? Aren't you embarrassed to live at home at your age?
Betty would mock me like this quite often. I swallowed the words. I don't want to hear that from a housewife who doesn't do housework and just enjoys herself, and responded with a vague smile. I've gotten to the point where I wish she wouldn't come to our house at all, but my father shows sympathy towards Betty, saying,
Jake might be too busy, and she could be lonely. He doesn't drive her away. Rather, he often invites her to have dinner with us.
I wish Jake and my father would show some understanding of the emotional toll this is taking on me. But when I see my father, who is unbothered by Betty's audacious attitude, smiling while eating with her, I can't help but think that as long as he's happy, that's all that matters. Why on earth did Jake marry such a woman? I often wonder, but I suppose there are qualities in Betty that only Jake can appreciate. I purposely ignore Betty's rude remarks and continue eating in silence. That day, as usual, my father invited Betty to have dinner. Jake has been swamped with work lately, and Betty usually helps herself to food left by the housekeeper. My father, perhaps feeling pity for Betty, decided to buy some expensive ingredients and proposed that the three of us have a nice meal together. I wasn't particularly thrilled, but if my father insisted, I didn't have a choice. I bought ingredients from the supermarket in town and managed to whip up some dishes I'd never cooked before. My father, who had been losing his appetite, was delighted and laughed, saying,
I'm particularly hungry today.
Betty arrived significantly past the agreed-upon time, sank into the dining table chair without so much as a decent greeting. The dishes I had prepared were lined up in front of her.
Now that we're all here, let's eat.
My father cheerfully suggested. Betty didn't seem pleased. She poked at the food with her fork, heaved a big sigh, and said,
Do you think I can eat something that looks this unappetizing?
Betty shot me a look of contempt as she glanced at the small dishes. I stared back at Betty, then turned to my father in surprise. My father also looked surprised, his mouth agape as he looked at Betty.
Well, it may not be as good as the meals your housekeeper makes, but Lisa made this from scratch. Can't you be a bit more polite?
When my father-in-law sternly rebutted, Betty immediately pulled a sour face. I never said I wanted to eat with you guys. I'm helping you make some memories, and you served me something that looks so unappetizing. Can't you consider my feelings a bit? What do you mean by making memories? I muttered, but Betty picked up on it quickly. Betty looked down on me and my father, smirked, and said something unthinkable. Well, your father won't live much longer, right? I'm the diligent daughter-in-law keeping him company, so I expect a generous inheritance. At this, both my father and I were left speechless. The living room fell silent. Could this really be the woman that the intelligent Jake chose to marry? Discussing inheritance before someone's even passed away? There's something wrong with that. Dad, you're going to live for many more decades. Before I knew it, I was shouting. Even Betty, who had been grumpily picking at her gratin, stopped when she saw me letting my anger out. Don't talk about inheritance. To you, Dad may be just another person, but he's family to me. He's also the same to Jake. He's the only living relative left for us who lost our mother. My father gently held me back as I leaned over the table. Panting heavily, I slowly sat back down. My anger towards Betty was still swirling inside my chest. With a deep breath that seemed to pierce my father's mood, I felt my pent-up emotions deflate.
I'll pretend I didn't hear what you just said,
my father said in an emotionless voice. Immediately, Betty's scoff came flying. All I did was state the facts. I don't want the inheritance taken away by a woman who's still living in her parents' house. Betty's words were so refreshingly straightforward, I no longer had the energy to be angry. She bravely rehashed what my father had tried to let slide, and threw her demeaning words and actions at us. I'll leave this rundown house to you, sister-in-law. Looks like you won't be losing your place to live. Betty's shrill laughter echoed. I wanted to retaliate with a complaint, but when I saw my father quietly shaking his head, I swallowed my words. My father was too lenient with Betty. Even though she might be lonely with Jake, often busy with work, it's not right to sympathize with an adult who can't tell what's appropriate to say and what's not. My father looked at my face and muttered softly,
She's the one Jake chose.
My father smiled with a hint of sadness. He looked like a father dealing with a troublesome daughter, and also like a man completely worn out by life. I couldn't say anything when I saw my father's face. I had things to say to both my father and Betty, but I wanted to know what Jake thought about all this more than anything. Does Jake know about Betty's behavior? If he's aware of it and just letting it slide, I have to say something as his sister. In the end, Betty barely touched the food I made and left early after a brief conversation. Only my father and I were left in the large living room.
Creating memories, huh? Maybe she's right.
I quietly exhaled as I noticed my father's figure suddenly seeming smaller when he murmured that. Due to Jake's suggestion, our family decided to go on a trip to France. My father wanted to go to France while he could still walk on his own, so Jake and I planned the trip. Of course, I initially asked Jake to take Dad and go on the trip with just the three of them, without me. Betty would always make snide comments toward me if I was present. I didn't want to ruin the cheerful atmosphere of the trip. However, Jake insisted that it would be best to have someone who usually observes Father's condition, so he ended up purchasing 4 tickets. I reluctantly agreed to accompany them on the trip to France, and as I expected, Betty was in a bad mood the whole time and didn't exchange a single word with anyone on the plane. Once we landed, we went straight to the heart of Paris and enjoyed sightseeing. My father was unbelievably energetic, exploring everywhere. Betty seemed to lighten up a bit when Jake bought her a brand name bag. She walked arm in arm with Jake, but I couldn't help but notice that Jake didn't look particularly happy. At that moment, I accidentally made eye contact with Betty. She glared at me so fiercely that my heart jumped.
By the way, why is Lisa here with us?
Betty let go of Jake's arm and confronted me.
I asked her to come. In case something happens to Dad, we need someone who can handle it.
Jake tried to step in to help, but it seemed like his words didn't reach Betty. She kept staring at me, snickering.
What's it like to go on a trip overseas with my husband's money? Airfare isn't cheap, so don't be extravagant,
Betty said arrogantly.
We're staying in a suite at the hotel, but it would be fine for Lisa to sleep outside, right?
Jake called Betty's name sharply, trying to stop her, but she didn't listen.
How does it feel to live not only off your parents, but also off your brother?
I felt the blood rush to my head at that comment. Betty, you're the one living off Jake. Even though you're a housewife, you hired a housemaid and don't do any housework.
Enough. Both of you, stop it.
My father intervened just as Betty and I were about to get into a quarrel. With a serene expression, Dad calmed me down, glancing at Betty.
It seems our presence is spoiling your trip. We'll go home. Sorry for disturbing you. Lisa, could you check the bus schedule to the airport?
Without anger or distress, he calmly made his declaration. A smile spread across Betty's face, while a look of panic raced across Jake's.
Wait a minute. What should we do when you guys are gone?
Jake had a sudden realization and tried desperately to keep us from leaving. However, once Dad decided to go home, his resolution was firm. He had me check the bus to the airport, and he quickly set off in the opposite direction towards the bus stop. I had no choice but to follow Dad, while keeping an eye on my brother and his wife.
We'll be just fine without the old man and old lady.
Betty's voice echoed from behind us. I was momentarily angered at Betty treating Dad as an old man, but I had no time to waste on her. I chased after Dad, who was walking ahead, while hearing Jake's cries of anguish and Betty's insults thrown at him. Jake barged into the cafe near the airport where we were having tea, looking desperate. His forehead was covered in an extraordinary amount of sweat, signaling something was amiss. In a frenzy, Jake rushed to our table and bowed his head to us.
I'm sorry about earlier. I'll apologize properly later, but for now, I need help with Betty.
Jake bowed deeply, pleading with Dad. Dad and I looked at each other in surprise. What happened to Betty? When I asked in place of Dad, Jake began to explain with renewed energy what happened after we left. After we boarded the bus to the airport, Jake and Betty took a taxi to the hotel. The problem occurred after they got in the taxi. The English that worked at the tourist spots didn't seem to work with the taxi driver. Neither of them spoke French, and they couldn't understand what the driver was saying. The driver was asking them something, but they responded without really understanding. As a result, Jake said that when he paid the money and got off, the driver drove away with Betty still inside.
I can't get through to Betty on the phone. She might have been mugged or something after she was dropped off.
Jake said, his face turning pale, probably figuring it would be faster to rely on us rather than trying to cope on his own, and winding up out of his depth. Jake, who doesn't understand French, asked for our help. My father and I can speak French perfectly. Betty appears to think of my father as an old man who can't do anything, but he used to be a French teacher, and I too am a current French teacher. This trip to France was planned by Jake, wanting my father to reminisce about his youth. Once my father arrived in France, he seemed filled with nostalgia and vitality, perhaps remembering his time studying abroad. Since I too had studied abroad in France during my student days, after parting ways with my brother and his wife, we slowly talked about our time studying here. My father listened to the stories with a serious expression and eventually gave a slow nod.
Let's return to the city center. I bet the taxi that dropped you guys off is waiting for its next fare there.
With my father's command, we quickly got ready and set off on a journey to find Betty, who had been left somewhere. My father and I split up to look for the taxi that had dropped off my brother and his wife after returning to the city center. Most taxi drivers speak French without resorting to English. Before me, my father found the taxi that had taken them and quickly arrived at the location where Betty was said to have been dropped off. Fortunately, Betty was there, exactly where she had been dropped off, unhurt, slumped over. It was good that she was uninjured, but as soon as she arrived, she seemed to have been pickpocketed, and all her bags and valuables were gone, leaving her sitting there penniless. When Betty saw Jake's face, tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly scowled when she saw us.
What are they doing here?
Betty, who was plainly grumpy, asked Jake, and he sighed heavily.
If it weren't for the two of them, you'd have been left here penniless forever, you know. Show some gratitude.
Betty's eyes rounded in doubt.
What do you mean? Without them, our trip would have been a disaster. You and I, we can't speak French. That's why we ended up like this. But these two are different. Both are French teachers, far better than me.
Betty looked uncomfortable, her gaze flitting over to us. A bad thought sprouted in me, and I dropped the quiet words to Betty. If we hadn't found you, you might have been sleeping rough here. Betty bit her lip in frustration. And also, the expenses for the trip were split equally between Jake and me. How's that? An overseas trip fully enjoyed on the money of an old lady living at her parents'? At this, Betty's shoulders began to shake.
It's your father's money anyway, isn't it?
To Betty's counter-argument, my father gently shook his head.
I didn't do anything. Lisa and Jake, they're doing well on their own. They're my pride and joy.
Just when I thought Betty was glaring at me intently, she fell silent without saying a word. Even though she had been helped, she didn't utter a single word of thanks. I had a mountain of things I wanted to say to her, but my father whispering, "Take it easy," made me hold back and keep my mouth shut. For Betty, this must have been an incredibly humiliating event. She must not have expected to be saved by the one she had been looking down upon. Even Jake seemed fed up with Betty's stubborn antagonism towards us, his face showing clear signs of frustration.
Well, now that the issue has been resolved, shall we resume sightseeing? Let's go to a restaurant I used to frequent when I was studying here.
My father suggested cheerfully. At my father's bright words, the family was once again united. We ignored the depressed Betty and thoroughly enjoyed our trip in France. Upon our return to the States, Jake was constantly apologizing to us, and he surprisingly and abruptly divorced Betty. Shocked, I asked him why they had married in the first place. Apparently, Jake had married Betty because she claimed to be pregnant and insisted he take responsibility. After they married, it turned out that her claim of being pregnant was a lie. However, Jake said he couldn't easily file for divorce due to concerns about his public image. However, his patience with Betty, who looked down on my father and me, had run its course, leading him to decide on the divorce. After the divorce, Betty was kicked out of their new home and couldn't continue her life as a housewife anymore. Of course, there was no maid to take care of the housework for her. What's more, due to a pickpocket incident during our trip to France, Betty ended up losing half her assets. She must be working hard, breaking a sweat by now. My father, remembering his younger days during our trip to France, became noticeably more cheerful and lively. I quit my long-term teaching job at school and am now busy running a French language school at home after some renovations. I'm hoping that my father will also teach French in our school someday. Our dreams as a family continue to expand.
Hey, where are you? What are you doing? My mom is in trouble.
The voice on the answering machine message came from my husband. My mother-in-law had collapsed and had to be rushed to the hospital by ambulance. When I opened the wardrobe in my mother-in-law's room to prepare for her hospitalization, I saw an unbelievable picture of my husband and sister-in-law. When I saw the picture, my mind went blank and I ran to my parents' house to escape. It had been 3 years since I met my husband. I had been deceived for a long time. My husband did not love me. He just wanted a wife. I could never forgive him. So I decided to divorce him. My name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old and I work at a beauty salon. 4 years ago, I was in a hurry. My friends and colleagues from school were getting married one after another. I wanted to get married while I was still in my 20s. I was tired of hearing about husbands and children from my friends who were married. My friends may not have meant to belittle me, but although I listened to them smiling, there were times I cried on the way home. I was so envious. I hadn't had a boyfriend for a while, and I wondered if I would ever get married. Such thoughts made me feel gloomy and impatient. I had 2 years left in my 20s, so I decided to start marriage activity with all my heart. I think I did most of what I could, such as dating apps and marriage activity parties. I met a lot of people, but it was difficult to meet the right person. The person I liked was not marriage-minded and never got to the point of a relationship. I don't think I have high ideals, but it doesn't work out. I've only ever had friendships and then relationships. I was struggling with the difficulties of marriage activity. In the meantime, my friends were getting married one after another, so I decided to register with the marriage agency. It was expensive, but I thought that there would only be people I really wanted to marry there. That's when I met my husband, Ken. He was 5 years older than me and a refreshingly handsome man working for a prestigious company. It was a wonder that he wasn't married, and from the moment I saw his profile, I knew he was the only man for me.
I signed up because I wanted to get married as soon as possible.
That's what my husband said on the day we first met. Me too. Nice to meet you. I thought he was a refreshing person, just like his profile, polite and nice in the way he talked to me. I appealed to him like never before. I told him that I didn't have much education or work experience, but that I liked doing housework.
I'm too busy with my work to take care of the house, so I want to marry someone like Sarah,
he said with a smile. I was flattered and so happy. Finally.
I actually live alone with my mother. She has a chronic disease, so I can't leave her alone. If we were to get married, I think I would ask her to live with me. I hope you will consider that as well,
he explained politely. I was a little surprised, but I felt that he was sincere in telling me in advance, rather than suddenly telling me after we get married. In my work, I've often dealt with female customers of all ages, so I'm used to dealing with older women. I'm rather good at it. I didn't know what kind of person my future mother-in-law was, but as long as she would meet me, I thought living with her would not be a problem. More importantly, I wanted to get to know Ken better. He seemed to like me and we were able to go on a few dates. The more I met him, the more I thought he was a gentleman and a nice person. I was also able to sit in one dinner and meet his mom. His mom was petite and very pretty. Sarah, you're a lovely lady and you're too good for Ken. I know you might be nervous about living with me, but you don't have to worry about me. I have a chronic illness, but I don't need nursing care. Next time, let's go out for parfait instead of this nice restaurant, she said. She has a high voice, speaks in a relaxed manner, and we share a love of sweets, so I thought we would hit it off. I no longer felt uneasy about living together. Ken said that he wanted to get married right away, and we started dating on the premise of marriage. Ken was a busy man, constantly working, but he made time for me. We went on trips and spent a lot of time together. Even after seeing his face right after waking up, my impression of him was still the same as it was when I first met him. He was refreshing. The more I saw him, the more I liked him. His mom and I became such good friends that we even went out for sweets together. She takes a lot of medication, but she's full of energy and young. I was worried about her though, because she has to wait in line at popular restaurants. Don't worry, I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to taste food so good that I have to wait in line, she said with a big smile on her face. Treating her like a friend, I sometimes forgot about the age difference in their relationship. She told me that her mother-in-law had been divorced twice and that she had had some difficulties when she was younger. We dated for around 6 months and then got married. I was happy that we were able to get married just barely in our 20s, and from the bottom of my heart, I was glad that I had worked so hard on my marriage activities. We quickly registered our marriage and began preparing to live together. Then one day, my husband told me there was something he needed to talk to me about. I wondered what was going on and had a bit of a bad feeling about it.
I never told you this before, but I have a sister, Hannah, who is not related to me by blood.
At first, I didn't quite understand what he meant. Hannah was my husband's stepfather's daughter. My mother-in-law and father-in-law divorced 5 years ago. My father-in-law is dead, and Hannah has no family. My mother-in-law and Hannah don't get along well, so she never comes to my in-laws' house. But my husband says he's worried about my sister-in-law, who has no family and keeps in touch with her.
I'd like to invite her to the wedding, but my mom hates her and is against it. But she means a lot to me, and I want to introduce her to you at least once,
he said. I was worried about what kind of a person my mother-in-law, who was so kind to me, would hate, but I could see how much my husband cared about his family, so I decided to meet her. Nice to meet you, Sarah. I'm Hannah. She was a very beautiful and flamboyant-looking person. She said she worked at a bar. I couldn't believe that my mother-in-law disliked her. She was not at all unpleasant and cheerfully made the occasion more enjoyable. When Ken was in middle school and I was in high school, we started living together. Isn't it like a comic book that we suddenly became a family?
Hannah, what do you mean, like in a comic book? I was a nervous teenager.
Hannah told me stories about the days she lived with Ken, and Ken would make fast-paced quips about her stories. Perhaps because they were so beautiful, they seemed like a perfect couple. I could tell that she was very dear to my husband. Sarah, I'm sorry I couldn't make it to your wedding. Be a good wife, Hannah said to me as we parted.
Don't tell my mother about today. If she gets angry, it will be a pain in the butt,
Ken said on the way home. I don't know what kind of conflict there is between my mother-in-law and Hannah, but I don't think it's any of my business. I decided not to tell anyone about my meeting with Hannah and kept it to myself. And so life began for the three of us. Ken was still busy with work and came home late every day. Sometimes, when he had a day off, he would go out with my mother-in-law and I, just the three of us. I was also working, so I did the housework in cooperation with my mother-in-law, and sometimes we went out to eat sweets or see a movie together. By all accounts, we were a happy family. I was a little worried about my mother-in-law because sometimes when she wasn't feeling well, she would sleep all day. I tried to keep in touch with her frequently while I was at work. The only thing that bothered me when we started living together was that Ken was always looking at his phone. He's almost always on his phone doing something, except when he comes home and is eating. He seems to bring his phone into the bath as well. At first, I didn't mind because I thought maybe he was addicted to playing games, but it was so much that I began to worry about it. One time, he called me to say he was heading out, and I called him back because I wanted him to get me something at the convenience store, but his phone was engaged the whole time. I couldn't get through to him on the phone. And then he came back. Ken, I've been calling you all day, I said.
Sorry, I got a call from the company,
he said. We had just gotten married, and I didn't think it was possible that he was cheating on me, but I couldn't help but be curious. My mother-in-law didn't seem to be bothered by it, as if it was a normal occurrence. One day, I felt bad, but I glanced at the screen of his phone and saw that he was texting someone. It seemed that they talked often. One night, Ken came home late, and I wondered who he was talking to in the middle of the night. Hey, who do you always talk with in the middle of the night? I asked, pretending to be silly, after my mother-in-law went to bed. Ken seemed unbothered by my question.
It's my sister. Did you suspect me of cheating on you? Ho ho ho. Don't worry.
He laughed. I laughed along with him and thought I had lost it by worrying too much. From then on, I didn't care how much he was on his phone. But he was always busy with work and didn't have much time to spend with me. And I was a little uncomfortable with him spending nearly all his free time with Hannah. 2 years later, life with the three of us was going well. My mother-in-law and I would always visit the sweet store whenever it opened. Today's pancakes might be the best pancakes of all time. I was thinking the same thing. I can't wait to try them with you. If a stranger saw us, they wouldn't think we were mother and daughter. I never once felt self-conscious about the fact that we lived together, and I loved my mother-in-law. Ken is still busy with work and comes home late. He's on his phone all the time. I was used to it by now, and I didn't say anything. I'm not asking him to do the housework, but I did accumulate small complaints that if he had time to contact Hannah, he could at least put the socks he took off in the laundry. However, when Ken had time off, he made time for our family, and he never forgot to celebrate our wedding anniversary or my birthday. Although there were small complaints, we were still a happy family. Then one day, my mother-in-law was sick and spent the day in bed. I was worried and went to check on her several times. She seemed to sleep quietly during the day, but in the evening, "Sarah, I'm in pain," she complained. She was breathing hard. I called an ambulance in a hurry. The ambulance arrived immediately and I rode in it to the hospital. I was relieved when I found out that she wasn't in critical condition. I called Ken to let him know that she was going to be hospitalized for a while. He left work early to go to the hospital, and I decided to go home and pack to stay with my mother-in-law in the hospital for a few days. Upon returning home, I opened the wardrobe in my mother-in-law's room to prepare her insurance card and personal seal. My mother-in-law said they were in the top drawer, but I couldn't find them, so I opened the bottom drawer. Then I found a small box in there. I opened the box thinking it might contain an insurance card and found a large number of photographs in it. I was so shocked when I saw them that I went to the bathroom and threw up. There were pictures of Ken and Hannah in it. It wasn't a picture of them as brother and sister. It was a picture of them as lovers. They were holding hands and kissing each other, and I felt sick just looking at a few of the pictures, so I closed the box. It was painful to think about the fact that he had been in close contact with Hannah up until this point. My mind went blank, and the next thing I knew, I was running to my parents' house with that box in my arms. At my parents' house was my mother, who was surprised to see me. When my mother saw what was in the box, she hugged me. After crying for a while, she saw that I had calmed down. These pictures of Ken and another woman. Is he cheating? She asked me. My mother was surprised when I told her that it was Hannah and that it was in the wardrobe in my mother-in-law's room. I hadn't even told my mother that I had a sister-in-law. I can't live with him anymore, I said to my mother. She said, "Of course you can't live with him. I can't allow it." My mother was also angry. When I looked at my phone, I found a lot of incoming calls from Ken and a voicemail message that said,
"Hey, where are you? What are you doing when your mother is in trouble?"
The message was an angry one. I thought, I'm the one who should be angry. I turned off my phone that day because talking about it would remind me of the pictures and make me sick. The next day, out of the goodness of my heart, I contacted him. "There's something I need to talk to you about this evening. I'll be there with my mother, so please call Hannah," I told him.
"Thank goodness, she's alive. I wondered what you were going to say when my mother was in trouble."
He started blabbing on and on. "Please do. I'll see you at night." I hung up the phone. As soon as I hung up the phone, I went to my mother-in-law's hospital room. "Sarah!" My mother-in-law looked at me happily and called my name. "I'm sorry you're not feeling well, mother-in-law, but I wanted to hear the truth." I opened the box I found in my mother-in-law's wardrobe and showed it to her. Then my mother-in-law began to shed tears. "Sarah, I am so sorry, Ken. He has an older sister. She's the stepdaughter of my ex-husband, and 5 years ago, she told me that they were lovers. Even though they're not related, they're both my children. I told them I couldn't allow that to happen. Hannah got angry and left the house, and I never saw her again. I should have told you. But they're old photos, don't worry. I don't even know what Hannah is doing now, and I'm sure she's not in contact with Ken," she said. My mother-in-law had straight eyes and didn't look like she was lying. Ken is still in contact with Hannah. In fact, he introduced me to her once, years ago. When I said this, my mother-in-law shed another large tear. "But you're already married." "I'm sorry. You did nothing wrong, but I can't be a family with Ken anymore. I'm going to divorce him." "Don't apologize to me. It's my fault for not noticing. I'm sorry," my mother-in-law said. I couldn't stop crying either. I left the hospital room and went to the house where my mother, Ken, and Hannah were waiting. When I arrived, they were all waiting for me. I sat down and immediately showed them the pictures. "You two are lovers, and I'm divorcing you." Ken didn't seem offended and said,
"Oh, yes, that's right. Me as a family member and me as a lover are two different things. We were happy as a family, weren't you? Mom was happy too. What's wrong with that? We don't have to get divorced,"
he said with his usual fresh smile. Hannah too. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but I have no intention of destroying your family. I don't think divorce is necessary," she said. I was trembling with anger as I listened to what they were saying. "Don't be silly. This is cheating. How can I be family with someone like that?" I yelled at them in a loud voice.
"Well, don't be so loud. If you want a divorce, that's fine. I've done my duty as a family member. Since you're the one who initiated it, it's an amicable divorce.
Ken said something I didn't understand. What? What's amicable about this? This is a huge betrayal. I'm going to charge both of you alimony.
Oh, okay. That's fine. I'll pay as much money as you want. In return, don't tell my mother. As for the reason for divorce, let's just call it a personality conflict.
I've already told your mother everything. She was crying. I told her we're getting a divorce.
What? Why would you do that?
Hearing my words, he lost his composure and shouted loudly. Hannah too. Why did you tell her? She cried. My lawyer will contact you about the alimony, so goodbye. With that, I left the house with my mother. My mother said, "You did a great job." She hugged me. I cried loudly into her chest. Now I know that Ken didn't care about me from the beginning. He just wanted a wife to reassure his mother. I wanted to marry him too, and maybe we were happy as a family, but I can't forgive myself for not knowing that I had been betrayed ever since we met. I'm glad that I realized it now and was able to get a divorce. Later, through my lawyer, the divorce was successfully finalized. I requested alimony from Ken and Hannah, but Hannah didn't have any money and was angry at Ken for only paying his share of the alimony. Their relationship soon deteriorated and they decided to separate. Hannah couldn't afford to pay the alimony, so she started working lunch and dinner shifts at the bar where she originally worked. After she was discharged from the hospital, my mother-in-law was angry with Ken and told him that if he sees Hannah even once in the future, she will cut ties with him. My mother-in-law and I still keep in touch and we occasionally go out for sweets. I'm relieved that she is out of the hospital and seems to be in good health. I now live with my parents. I'm busy preparing for the reopening at the beauty salon where I used to work. When things settle down a bit more, I'll start living alone again. I'm no longer envious when I hear about my friends who are married. Until the day comes when I meet someone wonderful again, I'll keep working hard.
My name is Sherry. I am thrilled to be opening my own coffee shop. My husband Ken left his job at a restaurant to join me. After all, it was our dream to run a coffee shop together. We don't have kids yet, but this shop we've created through countless trials and errors, from financing to location and interior design, is our baby. So we are eagerly awaiting for our grand opening, our baby's debut. One day, while we were buzzing around with preparations, we had a visitor to our place, right above the shop. It was Ken's mom, my mother-in-law. She's a laid-back person, accepting of our venture. I admire her calm character and kindness so much. I hope to be such a mother-in-law when I have my own daughter-in-law. It's still a few days early for our grand opening celebration, but she arrived with an enormous load of luggage. Surprised, Ken and I asked what happened. Then she said, "I've been kicked out of Joe's house." Just as she said, she'd been kicked out of the apartment she shared with my brother-in-law and had nowhere else to stay. I knew this would be a busy time for you guys, but she looked apologetic. Her nonchalant attitude only made it harder for me. But Ken and I, we were both furious, not at her, but at my brother-in-law. Ken immediately called him. "Joe, Mom showed up alone at our place, saying she's been kicked out. What's going on?" Joe, remorseful yet firm, told us, "We just can't live together. My wife and I are also swamped, starting a new business, and we don't have time to take care of Mom, who's becoming forgetful. Could you guys take care of her for a while? Once we're settled, we'll come to get her." Though it served his interests, we couldn't trust his words. Joe had reluctantly cared for our mother-in-law just because he was the older brother. Joe's wife wasn't very caring either. They must be having a blast after kicking her out. So I thought of a way to prevent our kind mother-in-law from feeling lonely or pitiful. "Okay, if that's what you say, Joe. Mother-in-law, you can live with us." There was no other choice. Their father had already passed away, and there were only 2 brothers, so there was no one else to take care for her. I feel a bit imposed upon, but my mother-in-law is family to me too. I can't just not take care of her, especially since she's so kind and I love her dearly. "If you're fine with it, then I want her to stay with us too." Ken also seems optimistic. Apparently, Ken was always a mama's boy, so it may actually be a good thing for him to have his mother close by. Well, thanks, Ken. Sherry. I'll have to think about how I can repay you. My mother-in-law seems to understand the situation, or maybe she doesn't. She just responds casually. How about I make dinner every day? Oh, but you two are running a restaurant, so there's no need for me to cook, right? I think helping your family is a given, but if she wants to repay us, Ken and I thought about having her help at the store sometimes. Mother-in-law, if you'd like, could you help out at the shop sometimes? Chatting with customers, making desserts, spending time like that might be enjoyable. Well, if it helps you two, I'd like to do anything. Mother-in-law happily agreed. If she considers it as one of the household chores, she'll probably get used to cooking quickly. Anticipating that, Ken and I talked about having her help with mainly cooking. With the conversation going in that direction, we decided to show her with the store downstairs. After we went down the stairs and showed her around the ground floor cafe and introduced the opening menu, my usually slow-paced mother-in-law suddenly became clear and assertive. Ken, Sherry, this shop won't be popular as it is. It's still not too late to prepare, so start now. Ken and I were astounded at the confidence out-of-the-blue ideas our mother-in-law proposed. For example, given the current retro trend, even a newly built store should have old-fashioned interior and background music. The menu should include items that mother-in-law used to eat when she was young, to not only attract young people riding the retro wave, but also to appeal to older customers. Moreover, since the number of candy shops in our town is decreasing, we should set up a corner for candies, allowing buyers to eat inside the store and would attract families with children. All her ideas were innovative and in line with the town's needs. They were so spot on that we had to agree, and under the direction of our mother-in-law, we immediately began preparing. After our mother-in-law started living with us, our long-desired store opened a few days later, and a month has passed since then. If the store had no future, the number of customers would significantly decrease after a month, but we don't have that worry with our store. We get so many customers every day that there's a line. All this is thanks to our mother-in-law. Sherry, the sandwich for table 3 is ready. Please bring it over. Yes, coming right now. Though I'm busy, each day is fulfilling. It might have been a real blessing that my mother-in-law decided to barge into our lives at that time. But one day, an intruder would disrupt our busy yet enjoyable days. It was my brother-in-law and his wife. We live in the same town, you know. We've heard the rumors. Your business seems to be flourishing. And isn't it true that Mom is being called the beloved granny of the store? My brother-in-law, with a sarcastic look on his face, glanced around the cafe and said this. Actually, we're thinking of starting our own shop too. A boba milk tea shop, which has been all the rage since last year. For that, we would love to have Mom help us out. That's why we came to pick her up. Give Mom back. Huh? Joe, what are you saying all of a sudden? Well, it was agreed from the start that she would return once we settled down. Now it's time. Come on, give Mom back. You guys have had enough of your good fortune, haven't you? It's our turn now. As if they can just return my mother-in-law like she's some kind of lucky charm. They can say whatever they want, but the cafe that the 3 of us created is just starting to take off. The real test is still to come. We're already relying on my mother-in-law as a full-time employee. If she were to leave us now, who would fill that gap? You can just hire part-time workers. A thriving business like yours should have no trouble attracting young workers, right? They'd probably work harder than an elderly woman like Mom. So Mom, let's say goodbye to Sherry and Ken, and go home together. At Joe's words, my mother-in-law agreed surprisingly easily. Both my husband and I were thrown off. Mom, you don't have to listen to Joe. You can stay where you want. Ken, I really think it's okay to go back to Joe's place. I'm sorry for interfering, Sherry, but it was fun working with you two. Come and visit us at home sometime. Without giving the impression like she was being taken away by force, my mother-in-law went back home with Joe and his wife. There was no time to feel wronged or bitter, but with the absence of my mother-in-law, who was like oil in our machinery, both the cafe and our home felt a bit emptier. That much was certain. Days where we forgot about time due to our busyness passed, and before we knew it, about half a year had passed. The cafe is still bustling as usual today. The advice from my mother-in-law, whom we haven't heard from since that day, has undoubtedly contributed to our success. I wonder if she's doing okay. I thought about calling her out of concern, but seeing Ken, who obviously felt abandoned by his mother, acting sulky, I couldn't bring myself to make contact. Welcome! The atmosphere at home isn't great, but the store opens today as always, and we have customers coming in. And on that day, it was not a customer who opened the door of the shop, but my mother-in-law, her usual serene expression on her face. Sherry, Ken, I've missed you. Mom, what brings you here all of a sudden? Mother-in-law, we were worried about you. You never reached out. Have you been okay? In response to our barrage of questions, my mother-in-law simply smiled and repeated what she had said once before. I was kicked out of Joe's house. They asked me to help at the shop, and I did, but it seems the business has been floundering. They told me I was a nuisance, so I left, and I was hoping to work with you guys again. It seemed that yet again my mother-in-law had been driven out for a reason you wouldn't think to do to your own mother. Ken and I began to plot our revenge on Joe, but it turned out there was no need. Joe showed up on his own, looking utterly worn out. Mom, why do you keep disappearing without a word? Both me and her are struggling without you. Joe's wife, also known as Her, wasn't present today. It seems she was overseeing the shop. Joe, don't make it sound like it's my fault. You guys said you wanted to cut labor costs. So I, being your family, decided to leave first. I then understood what she meant by being kicked out. If they wanted to cut labor costs, they'd first dismiss the ones who could easily be let go. Or my mother-in-law, who was at an age where she technically didn't need to work. That was not about you, Mom, but the part-timers, the students. We never said a word about you. Moreover, I don't want to be in your shop anymore. I don't want to jump into a sinking ship. If they asked me to finance a failing shop using my savings and pension, it'd be unbearable. Don't be like that. Come back to the shop and give us advice like you did to Ken. Didn't you say that even an old woman like you could give advice on managing the shop, and that Ken and his team were very kind? We also want advice from you. It's not a big deal. No way. I helped Ken and his team because they wanted to create a coffee shop like the one I worked at when I was young. A place where the local people can relax. You're only interested in your own profits and short-term gains. That's not true. I also opened a store to sell trending desserts for the revitalization of our community. Is that really so? Young people's trends change so quickly. You're not capable of adapting to such volatile changes because you're a business novice. Besides, even if it's trendy, young people are very observant of adults, and they'll naturally migrate to a better shop. Your shop might be novel and shiny, but the staff training isn't up to the mark. And customers don't seem comfortable there either. Just because you have experience working in a finance department and are good with numbers, it doesn't mean you can run a business well. It's pathetic. It's clear that the staff are blindly led too. With a sigh, my mother-in-law continued to speak with a sorrowful expression, as if lamenting her own son. In a small-town diner like this, you can't just mindlessly sell what's trendy among young folks. You failed to cater to customers' needs. You couldn't captivate their hearts. I wonder if you really aspire to be in the service industry. It saddens me. Especially since I used to be a waitress at a coffee shop. I just couldn't, and don't want to, work at your place. You should have said so from the very beginning. You were quick to intervene with Ken, but with me, you just went along with things. I couldn't intervene, Joe. Your shop is targeting young people from the start, and there's nothing I, an old lady, can make suggestions on. I don't fully understand young people's trends because of my age. I'm just an old woman who used to be a waitress. I can't live up to high expectations. Now please, stop making a scene in Ken's shop. You should go back to your place and deal with your finances. Joe, feeling belittled by his mother, finally blew up. Enough! Let's go home! If you say you only knew about coffee shops, I'll change my business and make it a coffee shop. You can give me advice like you did for Ken and make me a lot of money. Joe tried to grab his mother's arm and pull her away. Ken and I stepped in, restraining Joe. It wasn't just Ken. I had also lost patience. Listening to the conversation, I had been holding back words I'd long wanted to say. There's no way someone who can't even care for his own mother can consider the needs of complete strangers. You can go home on your own. And don't come to see your mother again. She is a coworker to us, not a tool for you to make money. My husband threatened to call the police if he caused any more trouble. And with that, Joe finally left. After that, Joe and his wife, who treated my mother-in-law terribly, predictably failed in their business and ended up filing for bankruptcy. On top of that, they were sued by their part-time workers for harassment and unpaid wages, resulting in having to pay a hefty compensation. Joe and his wife got divorced, and he was also sued for alimony, ending up in layers of debt. Joe, who had treated his own mother so horribly, couldn't rely on his family anymore. He would have to live and work alone, slowly paying off his debt. We heard about Joe's situation through a relative, but my mother-in-law didn't seem to care, showing no intention of throwing him a lifeline. I don't have time to worry about him. I'm going to be a grandma. I'm looking forward to taking care of my grandchild. Indeed, neither mother-in-law nor Ken and I had the time to worry about Joe. Our shop was thriving more than ever since mother-in-law came back, and we were blessed with our long-awaited child. Sherry, don't stress out just because it's your own shop. Work at your own pace. All of us, and our regular customers too, are most excited to see your child's face. Thank you, mother-in-law.
My husband is the type of husband who would take our daughter to visit his parents on the weekends, all so I can have some alone time. But there was a hidden motive behind his kindness. I became consumed with anger towards him when I learned the truth. Unforgivable. Surprisingly, the most unexpected couple empathized with my anger and took action to reprimand my husband. My name is Emily. I live with my husband Jack and our daughter Lisa. My husband didn't have a close relationship with his parents and was reluctant to visit them even after we got married. He would always say, "You shouldn't have to deal with the awkwardness of going to my parents' house. We should enjoy our day off, just the two of us." It was nice of him to say that, but when our daughter was born, I knew things couldn't remain the same. His parents came to the hospital right after she was born, but we hadn't taken Lisa to see them since then. I started to feel guilty about not letting them see their granddaughter for half a year. "Hey, Jack, don't you think your parents would like to see their grandchild? We should take Lisa to see them soon. It's only fair."
"Don't worry about it. I don't want to spend my day off listening to my dad's nagging."
Jack's father was quite strict, and it seems that they didn't get along well since he was young. I felt hesitant to go visit his parents alone, especially considering our already distant relationship. Reluctantly, I enclosed a few photos of Lisa and apologized for our absence in a letter. Every time his parents would respond with a kind, "Thank you for the photos, don't worry about not being able to come visit." However, as Lisa grew older and it became difficult for Jack and I to go out as a couple, he suddenly started saying, "I'm going to my parents' house for a visit."
"I know you're always busy taking care of Lisa on a daily basis. Why don't you take some time to relax by yourself? I'll take Lisa with me."
"Oh, I feel bad about that. I never get to see your parents either. I'll come along."
"No, it's fine. I often come home late from work, right? It looks like it'll continue for a while, so I want you to rest when you can."
Convinced by his insistence, I happily sent off my husband and Lisa. Having Lisa there must have improved relations between Jack and his parents. He was in a good mood when they returned home. Ever since, he has continued his routine of working late on weekdays and visiting his parents with Lisa on the weekends. Come to think of it,
When was the last time I had some alone time with my husband? There was hardly any time for my husband and me to be alone. One Friday night, I decided to wait for him to come home so we could talk. Welcome home.
Emily, why are you still up?
I want to talk to you about something.
About what? I want to go to sleep. We'll be leaving early tomorrow to go to my parents' house.
That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I'm thinking about joining you guys tomorrow.
What? Why? You don't need to come.
I appreciate the thought, but I've had plenty of alone time already. I'd like to see Lisa interacting with her grandparents every once in a while too, you know? Plus, we haven't had much time for the two of us to talk lately. My husband hesitantly replied,
It's kind of hard to say this, but it seems like my parents feel more comfortable when it's just me and Lisa. They feel a bit conscious when you're around.
I was at a loss for words when I heard him say that.
Take some time for yourself at home.
As I indulged in these words from my husband, I wondered if a rift was unknowingly forming between me and my in-laws.
I'm going to visit my parents with Lisa tomorrow, just the two of us. Anyway, I'm going to take a shower and go to bed.
Jack spoke as he briskly made his way to the bathroom. With him putting it like that, there was nothing I could do. After the two left for his parents' house the next day, I wrote a letter to my in-laws for the first time in a long while. I apologized for not staying in touch and expressed my desire to visit them once in a while. This reminded me of when I used to write letters to them after giving birth. Back then, they used to respond kindly, but now I don't know if I'll receive a reply from them. After sending the letter, I waited for their response, as checking the mailbox became my routine. One day, I found a letter in the mailbox. It was from my in-laws. My heart pounded as I opened the envelope. The content of the letter was something I didn't expect.
We're glad to hear from you after such a long time. How is Lisa? Has she grown a lot? We would be happy if you could send us some photos again.
Judging from the content, it seemed that they hadn't seen Lisa in a long time. Then, where had my husband and Lisa been going every weekend? I thought back to my husband's recent behavior. Come to think of it, there was usually a scent of soap coming from Jack when he came home late. But the day I stayed up waiting for him, he was in a rush to take a shower. Could it be an affair? Suddenly, everything made sense. The late nights, leaving the house early on the weekends. I wanted to confront him immediately, but managed to restrain myself. If he was really having an affair, I needed evidence. That night, as soon as my husband fell asleep, I unlocked his phone. I searched through some past texts and easily found evidence of the affair. Plans for dates on his days off, messages about meeting up, and affectionate conversations were scattered everywhere. And one more thing. I found an email from a daycare center. It seems Jack was dropping Lisa off at a daycare center while he went to see his mistress, lying to me about going to his parents' house and leaving Lisa at a daycare, all to have an affair. My anger reached its peak. No man who abandons his precious daughter to meet his mistress deserves to be a father. I decided to first gather evidence of the affair. I gritted my teeth, holding back the urge to confront him immediately, and waited for the weekend. After Jack and Lisa left to visit his parents' house, as usual, I secretly followed behind them. Without realizing that I was following, Jack dropped Lisa off at the daycare center, completely accustomed to the process. Meanwhile, Lisa cried, looking distressed to be left at an unfamiliar daycare. Lisa, hang tight just a little longer. I'll be back to pick you up right away. With a sense of unease and reluctance, I trailed behind my husband, unable to shake off the lingering feeling. My husband, all giddy and excited, arrived at the train station and ran up to a woman with a big smile on his face. The woman also spotted him and ran over. She must be Jack's mistress. They didn't seem to care that they were in public as they got all lovey-dovey, walking arm in arm. There was no longer any doubt about Jack's infidelity. Just as I captured an intimate moment between them in a photo, my phone rang. Hello? Oh, mother-in-law. The call was from Jack's mother. Long time no talk. What? Father-in-law? My mother-in-law, on the verge of tears, told me that my father-in-law had been rushed to the hospital after collapsing. I hurried back to the daycare to pick up Lisa, and then headed straight to the hospital. My father-in-law was in the bed, still unconscious. Beside him, my mother-in-law had an anxious expression on her face. Emily, thank you for coming. Oh no, I should apologize for not being in touch. That's not important right now. My mother-in-law noticed Lisa, and her eyes lit up. You've grown so much. Look, honey, Lisa's here to see you. Please wake up. She spoke to her unconscious husband, her eyes welling up with tears. But there was no response from my father-in-law. She wiped her tears and spoke to me. I tried calling Jack, but couldn't get through. I left him a message, but I guess he hasn't noticed it. I'll give him a ring. I called Jack. He didn't pick up at first, but after persistent calling, he finally answered. Emily, what's up? Where are you? You weren't answering, and I was worried. I'm out fishing with Dad. Bad reception here. My mother-in-law looked at me in shock at his words. I nodded to her and continued with the conversation. With your father? That's odd, because he's right here in front of me. What? Where the heck are you? I'm at the hospital. Your mother called to tell me that your father collapsed and was taken to the hospital. So that's why my mom kept calling. You knew she was calling and ignored her, didn't you? Was your rendezvous with your friend that important? What are you talking about? Don't play innocent right now. It's too late. I already know that you've been lying about going to your parents' house and instead having secret dates with your mistress. How? How did you find out? I wrote a letter to your parents, apologizing for not visiting in so long. Turns out they hadn't seen not only me, but you and Lisa either. I was shocked. If you want to meet your mistress so badly that you leave Lisa alone in daycare, don't even bother coming home. Hold on, I'll go pick up Lisa right now and head over there. I already picked her up. I can't believe you left her looking so sad and lonely. You followed me? Well, yes, I needed evidence for me to claim alimony after we get a divorce. I've got all the important scenes on camera now, so I can finally have peace of mind. Divorce? Alimony? Hold on. That's not what I... That was when I heard a sweet voice coming from the other end of the phone.
Jack, are you still on the phone? Hurry up and come over.
He hastily reacted to that voice. Be quiet. If this gets out, we'll be paying alimony. It sounds like he was speaking to his mistress, but his voice was loud and clear for us to hear. With my mother-in-law as a witness, claiming alimony was now a sure thing. I hung up the phone in disbelief. My mother-in-law gazed at me with astonishment. The conversation you just had with Jack. I'm sorry for all the trouble at such a difficult time. Jack has been out of the house every weekend lately, saying that he's going to visit you with Lisa. They haven't been coming over here at all. Yes, I noticed he'd been lying when I received the letter from you that led me to discover his affair. Jack's having an affair? How could he do such a thing when he has such an adorable daughter? He prioritized his mistress over our daughter. Today, as always, he left a reluctant Lisa in a daycare to go on a date with her. So, that's why he initially lied about being out fishing with his father. Having an affair is one thing, but what I couldn't forgive was how he neglected Lisa. I was collecting evidence to get a divorce when I received a call from you. Is that so? I'm sorry about my son. No, you don't have to apologize. Besides, it's not right to talk about us while your husband is in this condition. Just then, a raspy voice echoed through the hospital room.
Don't worry about it.
My mother-in-law and I were startled as we looked toward the source of the voice. My father-in-law, who barely opened his eyes, spoke to me.
Emily, feel free to let go of my son whenever.
Father-in-law! I hastily pressed the nurse call button. My mother-in-law rushed out into the hallway to get the doctor. The doctor arrived, and after examining my father-in-law, said,
No need to worry anymore. We'll keep him here one more day just to be safe. But if there's no change in his condition, he can be discharged tomorrow.
Thank you so much. My mother-in-law and I joyfully held hands. My father-in-law was also watching us with a gentle expression. As the doctor left the room, Jack entered.
Dad, are you okay?
Jack, aren't you supposed to be on a date? My husband tried to calm me down in a response to my remark.
Well, that was a misunderstanding. I just wanted some me time to unwind over the weekend. I might have blurted out something about going to my parents' place, but I haven't done anything to betray you.
He looked straight into my eyes as he spoke. For a moment, I almost believed him, but I had concrete evidence. I won't be fooled by you anymore. I saw you meeting up with a woman at the train station.
She's a colleague from work, and we happened to bump into each other.
But you guys started walking intimately together, didn't you?
We both hadn't eaten lunch yet, so we decided to grab some lunch.
Then what about the voice I heard over the phone? I'm sure I heard. If they find out about us, we'll get hit with alimony. At my words, Jack seemed flustered, but continued to look straight into my eyes as he continued.
I don't remember saying anything like that. Maybe it was a couple's conversation from the table behind us at the restaurant.
It seems like he was going to play dumb until the end. Am I just going to be swindled again? Just as I thought that, my father-in-law shouted at Jack.
Cut the crap. You've always been like this. When you lie, you always look people straight in the eyes.
Hearing his father's anger, Jack immediately shrank back. In a barely audible voice, he retorted against his father.
Dad, it's none of your business. None of my business. Have you forgotten all the times you've deceived people and caused trouble? You haven't grown at all. Don't you have any sense of responsibility as a father? Dad, please calm down. Shut up, you foolish son.
When I showed him the evidence on my phone, Jack finally gave in and admitted to the affair. Having been scolded by his dad must have hit hard. He accepted all my demands without making any excuses. First, we would proceed with the divorce as soon as his father is discharged from the hospital. I would get full custody of our daughter. He would transfer alimony and child support to my bank account every month. Following the suggestion of my father-in-law, I created a written agreement on the spot and had Jack sign it. Afterward, Jack bolted out of the room. He probably went back to his mistress. I, who remained in the room, bowed deeply to my in-laws. I'm really sorry for everything. If only I had gone with Jack and Lisa when they said they were going to visit you guys, none of this would have happened. My father-in-law responded kindly to me.
None of this is on you. The one at fault here is Jack. He betrayed his family. He's always had a tendency to disregard others' feelings and act according to his own selfish desires. I've tried talking to him time and again, but he never listened and only resented me for it.
So that's why he was so reluctant to go back home.
That's probably it. I thought he might grow up a bit after getting married, but I guess I was too optimistic. I've put you through a lot. I'm really sorry.
Oh no, it's me who should apologize. My mother-in-law hesitantly spoke to me. I feel terrible for what our son did, tainting your marriage records. I'm really sorry. It's okay. Being divorced or being a single mom isn't that unusual. We probably shouldn't be the ones saying this, but we'd still like to see you and Lisa, even after you cut ties with our son. We'll do whatever we can for the two of you. So if you ever need help, Please don't hesitate to ask. I had no intention of getting back together with Jack. But being a first-time parent was full of uncertainties. My mother-in-law's offer made me so grateful that I was brought to tears. My father-in-law agreed with her.
Yep, I'd like to second that. Let us support you and Lisa in place of our foolish son. Of course, I'll make sure he pays the alimony and child support.
Thank you both so much. I gave them a deep bow. After my father-in-law was discharged from the hospital, I started visiting their home with Lisa every once in a while. I didn't mind going to visit them at all, and Lisa loved spending time with her grandparents. I would have loved to visit even more, but I was worried about running into Jack. Perhaps noticing my concern, my father-in-law updated me on Jack's situation. As expected, Jack headed straight to his mistress's place after leaving the hospital. But she became unreachable a day after he brought up alimony. Apparently, they met on a dating app, and he didn't know her address or even her real name. Perhaps she was only after his money from the beginning, as she was much younger than Jack, and dressed in flashy attire. She must have realized that she couldn't get any more money and decided to abandon him. I couldn't find her either, so getting alimony from her was impossible. But thanks to my father-in-law, who advised me to set up the alimony a bit higher than average, what I received from Jack was sufficient for living. Jack, realizing he couldn't pay the alimony and child support with what was left of his assets, seemingly went to his parents to ask for money. My father-in-law didn't let him set foot inside the house.
I'm cutting ties with a foolish son like you. Don't ever come back. And don't you dare bother Emily.
And with that, he was kicked out. Jack was barely making ends meet and was somehow scraping together alimony and child support. Hearing all this made me feel relieved. Since my in-laws cut ties with him, I didn't have to worry about running into him while visiting them. I must say, marrying Jack was a mistake, but getting to know such kind and wonderful in-laws was a silver lining.